So I guess we can begin. We have a good quorum right now. So before I pass the word for our opening remarks, I just like to say good morning to everyone here. It's a pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of the Brazilian Alliance for Innovative Healthcare Industry. Sorry, this is an event promoted by Abiis. And this is going to be conducted entirely in English. No translations available today. Please keep your mics muted to avoid background noises. We are recording this session. I hope you all approve this in accordance to our Brazilian regulation. We might have a Q&A session in the end of the presentation of our speakers. So please bear in mind, we might open the floor for discussions afterwards, and feel free to send us through the Q&A and through the chat the questions you might have in case you'd like us to formulate for you. So with this, I would like to pass the word today to the chairman of the board of directors of Abiis, Mr. Bruno Bezerra, who is going to give our opening remarks today. Bruno, it's a pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marina. Can you hear me, everyone? Okay, so good morning, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. On behalf of Abiis, the Brazilian Alliance for the Innovative Healthcare Industry, it's my privilege to welcome you to today's Abiis MedTech and Trade webinar on the Mercosur European Union Agreement and its potential benefits for the medical devices sector. I would like to begin by expressing our sincere gratitude to our co-hosts and partners here, AdvaMed, MedTech Europe, and the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence, for their collaboration in organizing this important discussion. Your partnership has been invaluable in bringing together stakeholders from industry, government, and civil society. We are honored to be joined today by many leaders and experts from our devices industry, from governments, as well as our distinguished keynote speaker, Daniela Matos, from the Ministry of Development, Industry, Trade, and Services of Brazil, who participated directly in the negotiations. And I would like to thank you, Daniela, for your partnership and collaboration with our sector during all these years. Their participation underscored the importance of constructive dialogue between policymakers and industry as we evaluate how this agreement can strengthen market access, regulatory cooperation, innovation incentives, investment flows, and supply chain resilience, all with the ultimate aim of improving patient access to safe and effective medical technologies. Over the next hour, our panelists will share insights on regulatory alignment, tariff and non-tariff measures, intellectual property and innovation frameworks, and practical steps that companies can take to prepare for new opportunities. We encourage an engaged, solutions-oriented conversation and welcome your questions and perspectives during our Q&A. Many thanks again. Be welcome, everyone, and Marina, over to you.
Thank you, Bruno, and thank you for your kind words. Without delay, let's begin our first panel with Ms. Daniela Matos, Deputy Secretary of Trade, Foreign Trade Secretariat at the Ministry of Development, Industry, Trade and Services in Brazil. Daniela, it's a pleasure to have you here. Daniela will provide an overview of the Mercosur European Union Agreement and its impact on the medical technology sector. So, Daniela, thank you again, and the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Bruno. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Abiis, for inviting me and having this opportunity to share with you some information about Mercosur European Union Agreement. As all of you know, we are very excited with the coming entry into force of the agreement. We believe it's a very special moment for Brazilian trade, for Brazil-EU relationship, So we're very excited. So we can begin on this presentation. Okay, so I'll dive into 3 topics for today's presentation. I'll begin zooming out and having a look at the broader Brazil-European Union trade relations. I'm sure much of you are already aware of how our trade relations are, but I think it's important to do this zoom out before diving into the Mercosul-EU agreement itself. And after a few points I would like to point out in the Mercosur-EU agreement, I'll conclude my presentation presenting what we're calling a new era in Brazil-EU relations. So our idea is to discuss how to turn this agreement into concrete results. So these figures are from last year. So Brazil-EU trade relationship in goods, it was $100 billion of trade, exports and imports. The EU is Brazil's second trading partner, which is huge. EU corresponds roughly about 18% of Brazilian imports and 14% of Brazilian exports. And as you see, our trade is very well balanced. We almost export the same amount that we import. So the next slide. Oh, thank you. And this data, and I shared the QR code with you. So if you want to, you can access this website. This is provided by SESEX, by the ministry. We just shared some data and opportunities in this dashboard, trying to zoom in the data that we have between Brazil and EU. So here we have the main destinations in the EU for Brazilian exports. And I was reading Abiis, the report that you published a few days ago. And it is really interesting to see that many countries that appear as main destinations in the EU for the Brazilian exports, they are really similar to what countries are important for the medical sector. So Germany, Belgium, these I have seen that these are important destinations and partners for the medical device sector, and they are, of course, important partners as well for exports, Brazilian exports as a whole. So these 5 countries, which are Netherlands, Spain, Germany, Italy, and Belgium, they account for 73% of Brazil's exports to the EU. Next slide, please. And here we provide this information of largest Brazilian states that export to the EU. So Rio de Janeiro is the highest, and followed by São Paulo, Minas Gerais, Pará, and Mato Grosso. And what is also interesting to see is to see some states that the EU has the highest share in the state exports. So we see Sergipe, Amapá, Paraíba, Rio Grande do Norte, and Amazonas. So I would like just to invite everyone to access this dashboard. The QR codes are provided in the presentation. So if you have any doubts, and even if you have any suggestions, for now we are trying to provide as many data and information as possible so the private sector can fully take the benefits from the agreement. So we are conducting improvements in the website. So if you have any comments and suggestions, feel free as well. Next slide, please. So taking a look in the broader relationship and on trading services, we have exported $10 billion to the EU, and we have imported $26 billion. So in trading services, we see that the relationship is a little less well balanced, but it's curious to see that the import of these services are also important for the Brazilian industry. They are usually services that are used in the Brazilian industry. So it's a very interesting relationship. Another important information is that as of today, already 30% of companies that export in Brazil, they already sell goods to the European Union. So the EU is already a very important partner for Brazil. 30% of all exporting companies already sell goods to the EU. And it is also interesting to see that medium and small firms account for an important share of these companies. So it is an important partner in numbers, in rough numbers, but also in promoting trade by small and medium-sized enterprises, which is very important for the government. And also workforce. So these companies that export to the EU, and we did this correlation with HISE data in Brazil, and we discovered that these firms already employ more than 3 million workers in Brazil. So our expectation is that this agreement will improve and get these numbers even higher. But they are already they're already really important. Next slide, please. So going directly into the EU-Mercosur agreement, and here I will say some information that many of you already know. So it is, of course, a strategic agreement, especially when we think about the moment that we are in international trade, in international relations. So even for geopolitical reasons, it's a very, very important agreement. But talking specifically about trade, we are talking about an agreement that forms an integration of economies that are more than 700 million people and a GDP of more than $20 trillion, which is huge. It's the biggest trade agreement between two blocs in the world. So it's really something impressive. And of course, what we expect of the agreement for the Brazilian industry is that the progressive reduction of tariffs will mean greater competitiveness for Brazilian industry. We expect more efficient production chains. We expect to integrate Brazilian industry and European industry. And of course, we expect the agreement to generate employment and income to Brazil. Next, please. I'm not sure if it's Leticia, but can we go to the next slide?
Sorry, I have some problems. Just a second.
No problem.
I'm trying to pass, but it's not working. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So here we're also sharing this QR code. The QR code is from the fact sheet that we released when the agreement was signed. It has many information, but here I would like to share with you the estimates that we conducted here within SASEX. So it's a general equilibrium model, but just to show that the agreement is expected to have a positive impact in all economic variables in Brazil. So we expect a positive impact on GDP, on investment. We expect a reduction in consumer price levels. We expect an increase in real wages. And we also expect an impact on imports, of course. We expect to import more from the EU, but we also expect to export more. And what is interesting is that we expect that the impact on exports will be bigger than the impact on imports. And that's because since we will gain better competitivity, and this is not imports and exports only to the EU, it's general imports and exports. So what we are reading from these numbers and what the model brought us is that because of the reduction in tariffs, we will be more competitive. The inputs will be more competitive. We'll gain more technology in the Brazilian industry. So we expect to have more exports, not only to the EU, but to other countries. We expect the Brazilian industry will be more competitive, for instance, to export to Latin America or to other countries, Africa, because of the agreement. So this is something really important for us. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the timeline that we have experienced this year, and I would never say that this agreement would enter into force on May 1st, but this is the reality. Just yesterday or the day before, the Brazilian government and the European Commission, we shared this information that all of the notifications between countries have been concluded. So every country has concluded its ratifying process. And as the agreement says, after everybody notificates of all the procedures that are needed for the agreement to enter into force, the agreement will enter into force the first day of the second month. So this is May 1st. So May 1st, we'll have the agreement into force. And this was really fast for the ones that are keeping up with the process. The agreement was signed on January 16. On February 2nd, Brazil sent the agreement to approval for the National Congress. And on March 17, the Congress terminated and published the legislative decree. So this is very impressive for the ones that keep up with the Brazilian trade agenda and Brazilian trade agreements. This is really impressive. I have never seen something this fast. And I think this shows how much the Brazilian government and Brazil, not only the Brazilian federal government, but also the Congress and the society, how much we think this agreement is important. And this is something that the government and the opposition, and when the agreement was being discussed in the Senate, it was really interesting to see that the government was claiming the responsibility for the agreement and the opposition as well. So it's really something interesting to see, because nowadays in Brazil, it's difficult that different parts agree on something. But one thing is for sure, Brazil agrees with the importance and the positive impacts of this agreement. This is something really interesting to see. Next, please. And something that the federal government, and we have been saying this, and it's something that it's important for us to say to our domestic industry, it's that it's not a liberalization, it's not abrupt, it's not a market opening that simply maybe some refer to the liberalization that we had in Brazil in the 90s. It's not. It's really different. So we have this framework of gradual adjustment. And of course, the agreement preserves room for industrial adaptation in Brazil and for impact mitigation. And this is very important. And it's something that I have seen in the report published by Abiis, because we know it's something that the Brazilian industry, it's something so huge. And I was showing the data, and 18% of Brazilian imports come from the EU. So we will concede duty-free access to at least 18% of our imports. So this is huge. For Brazil, this is really huge. So we know that it should be something gradually and allowing for time for the industry to adapt. So this is something that we managed to do in the agreement. Next slide, please. So this illustrates what I was just saying. So if you take a look at the second column, we can see EU offer. So the EU offer, you can see that more than half of the products, which are 5,000 tariff lines or 5,000 products out of 9,000, so half, more than half, they are in the immediate tariff phase-out period, which means that in May 1st, more than half of EU products will be zero. And then you can see that in the short term, which are categories 4 and 7, which mean 4 and 7 years, we have a lot more, 25% more of the products. So EU's offer, it concentrates in the short term. And when you see Mercosur's offer, we concentrate the phasing out periods in longer categories. So almost half of our offer is on category 10 years or more. We can see that EU's half offer is on immediate category. Mercosur, 10 years or more. So this illustrates what I was talking about. Since we have higher tariffs, and it's really important for our industry to have time and to allow our industry time to adapt it and to have this gradual transition. Next slide, please. So I'll try to be fast in all of these chapters, because, as you know, there are many chapters, but it's important to highlight the chapter on rules of origin, which is also a really important chapter to be sure that the products that will benefit from the reduction of tariffs are really European products. And it's a very modern chapter, and it provides something that it's really new for us, which is the self-certification. And it's also really important because it reduces costs and bureaucracy. So it's a really modern and important chapter. There's also the chapter on trade facilitation, and it looks like the trade facilitation agreement, but it has some other aspects. It's important to reduce costs and simplify import and export procedures and provide transparency. We have also the TBT chapter that provides good regulatory practices, and it tries to avoid unnecessary barriers to trade. And of course, we encourage the use of international standards, public consultations, and to enhance predictability and juridical certainty between trade in our blocks. Next slide, please. I think we're facing technical problems, but yes, thank you. So other chapter that's really important, and maybe not so much for the medical device sector, but this is a chapter that we are very proud of. So it's the chapter and the annex on trade and sustainable development. As you know, the commitments on trade and sustainable development were initially a demand from the EU. But after many rounds of negotiations, we were able to transform this chapter in something that's really interesting for the EU, for Mercosur, for Brazil, and also to promote sustainable value chains, and also to see the chapter in a way that the Brazilian industry and Brazilian products would benefit from this chapter. As you know, Brazil has a natural sustainable development positive situation because of our energy matrix and all of that. So this is something really interesting that we were able to transform this chapter in something that was really positive for Brazil and for our exports. We also have the chapter on dispute settlement. And this is, we have the regular one that establishes mechanisms for resolving disputes. And also, we were able to include a section that was really interesting. We talked a lot about it, which is a section dedicated to preserve the balance of the agreement. So we call it rebalancing. So it looks like a little bit the non-violation and situation complaints at the WTO, for those that are WTO nerds. But the idea here is that regardless of having a violation per se of the agreement, if any part of the agreement finds that an action or regulation or something that's being done in the other part, that this regulation is not preserving the balance of the agreements, of the concessions that were negotiated, we can access this mechanism. So this was something really important as well, and it relates to the discussions on sustainable development. And we also have the chapter on small and medium-sized enterprises. This is a very interesting chapter. It provides for transparency. It tries to facilitate the integration of small and medium enterprises into global value chains and participation in public procurement. It's a very interesting chapter, and it's a chapter that we are anxious to implement, because we feel that small and medium-sized enterprises will be able to reap the benefits of the agreement. Next slide, please. So we also have the chapter on services and investment, which provides transparency, legal certainty for investors and service providers. This is also really important, and we also have some disciplines on domestic regulatory procedures. So this is essential for promoting investments between our two blocks. There's the chapter on government procurements. This one was really discussed, and this one was really important for this administration, for the federal government, because we see public procurement as a tool to promote industrial development. So we wanted to strike a balance, and we believe we did it with this chapter, in a way that we provide access for our exporters to access the government procurement at the EU. We also provide access in our procurement, in our government procurement, to European companies. But we did this in a way that we preserved some policy space in areas that are really important for Brazil, such as public health. And this was something very discussed in this chapter. So the Brazilian unified health system is excluded from the commitments of the agreement. So the Minister of Health and the Minister of Industry, we can continue to conduct industrial policy in this area. We also excluded small and medium enterprises, some exceptions for SMEs. We also excluded or allowed for the possibility of procurement of prototypes, which is something important and also impacts medical devices. So this was a really interesting chapter to discuss, and I believe we struck a really good balance in this one. There's also the chapter on intellectual property. Here we had long discussions on pharmaceuticals, intellectual property, and we also were able to have an equilibrium on what was understood as Brazilian and Mercosur interests and the EU interests. And one point that I always like to highlight here, and maybe it's not so interesting for the medical device sector, but it's the recognition of geographical indications. And we believe this is a really important aspect of the agreement, because it reinforces Brazil's brand in Europe. So cachaça, queijo da canastra, vinhos do Vale do Vinhedo will be products that will be recognized as Brazilian geographical indications. So this is really important for us. Next, thank you. So moving ahead and thinking about this new era of Brazilian trade and Brazilian trade agreements, and how because we have been talking about Mercosur-EU negotiations for almost 30 years, and now we are not talking about negotiations anymore. We are talking about implementing these agreements. And just zooming out and talking about other agreements that we negotiated in the last 3 years. So on December 2023, we signed the Mercosur-Singapore agreement. So this agreement was the first Mercosur agreement in more than 10 years. And the last one was Mercosur Palestine. So we see the difference. So we have been for so long trying to conclude agreements, and now we have done it. So this is really impressive. And on September 2025, we also signed Mercosur-EFTA agreements, and on January 2026, the Mercosul-European Union agreement. So these three agreements that we signed in the last 3 years, they will augment the share of trade of Brazilian trade covered by trade agreements. So it will increase from 12% to 31%. And this is really impressive. And this is really a turning point for Brazil trade. So for us, the moment now is that we should be able, and when I say we, I say the Brazilian government and the private sector, because now is the moment for the private sector to take ownership of this agreement. So the government negotiated, the opportunities are there in the text, in the tables, in the more than 1,000 pages that are there. But for it to be transformed into concrete business opportunities, the private sector needs to take ownership of the agreement. And you will play a very important role in this moment that we are in. So we are here. We are available to assist the private sector, but of course, we have a broad view of the agreement. So, for instance, it was really interesting to see Abiis' report on how are the products and how is trade in the medical device sector, because this is what we have been asking for the private sector. Take ownership of the agreement, read the agreement, read the tables. We are trying to provide as many information as possible. I believe that today we will release the tables that will simplify how to read the offers. So we'll provide it on a Power BI platform. So, but this is the idea. The government will help, but we think it's really the time for the private sector to take ownership of the opportunities. And I think this is the last slide, but I would like to share what we have been doing to implement the agreement. So we will start to promote capacity building events, and as I said, the dissemination of supporting materials. So probably today we will publish this Power BI tables that will simplify the way to read the offers. We will also publish a manual. We will improve the website that I mentioned on data between Brazil and EU trade. We also, and the Minister of Industry and Trade, Vice President Geraldo Alckmin, signed on March 17 a memorandum of intent with the president of IDB. So the idea is that IDB will support the government on this journey. Of course, it will provide us with consultants, and it will provide us tools so we can help the private sector. We are also conducting partnerships with Apex Brazil, with SEBRAE, and also with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because they have presence in all of the European countries. So it's also important for us to make European enterprises know of the agreement. We know this is something that the European Commission is doing, but it's also important for us to do it by the presence of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I think that just to conclude this presentation, I would emphasize that we have been seeing, and of course, the support for this agreement is really broad, as I mentioned, but we have been seeing some industries that are a little bit worried with the reduction of tariffs, and of course, with all the information that I shared today, we are able to show them that they should not be worried, that they should be calm. And for us, what we have been saying is that the greatest risk for us now is not the agreement, it's not the tariff reduction. The greatest risk is not to take advantage of the agreement. It's not to get the opportunities and to transform the opportunities into concrete business. So this for us is the moment to transform the agreement into concrete opportunities. So thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions, any follow-up questions.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you so much for this excellent overview of the agreement and the status that we are right now. I have questions. I know some of the audience already have questions as well, but in order to keep track of time and give the floor to the other panelists, my suggestion will be for us to continue with the next two panelists, and then we can have time for a Q&A. So also, members of the audience, please send your questions through the chat. Daniela, it will be a pleasure to keep with you during the next presentation, so we have the Q&A with your presence. Otherwise, we would jump the questions. Can you stay with us?
Yes, no problem. If something happens, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. So with this, I'm going to pass the word to our next panelist, Diana Caneca from MedTech Europe. Diana is going to talk about the Mercosur European Union Agreement, taking into consideration the MedTech sector in Europe. So Diana, thank you so much for your presence and participation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to join today's event. May I ask if you can see my presentation, just to check?
Yes, it's perfect.
Excellent. Thank you. No. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So it is a great pleasure to join today's event, and allow me to introduce myself very briefly. My name is Diana Kanecka. I'm responsible for international affairs at MedTech Europe. And I'll be pleased to share with you a perspective from European sector on the recently signed EU-Mercosur agreement. Before I dive into the details, let me just briefly introduce MedTech Europe. MedTech Europe is the European trade association representing medical technology industry, covering all types of medical technologies from in vitro diagnostics, medical devices to digital health technologies. We represent more than 170 multinational companies, and we also have a wide network of national associations, which gives us good insights into the industry. We also have an active international affairs department where we follow the major trade agreements and engage on addressing barriers to trade. So just to set some context, the previous speaker already provided a lot of useful facts and figures. The EU is the second largest trading partner for Mercosur, with 27 billion in exports in 2024. And then the European Union is the largest foreign investor in the region, with close to 390 billion euros invested in 2023. And Mercosur as a region is considered as a rapidly growing market with strong demand for advanced healthcare solutions. And so for medtech companies, it represents opportunities not only for trade, but also investment, technology transfer, partnerships, etc. So the agreement is very significant in terms of bilateral relations, and it has a potential of reshaping the conditions for European suppliers of medical technologies into several Latin American markets and vice versa. When we talk about the agreement, there are two agreements to keep in mind. We have the EU-Mercosur Partnership Agreement, which covers a broad range of commitments in trade, sustainability, and institutional cooperation. Prior to its implementation, it needs to be ratified by all 27 member states in the European Union. And then we have the interim trade agreement, which contains elements that fall under the exclusive competence of the European Union, mostly related to trade. And this can be provisionally applied without national ratifications. The Council has already adopted the agreement by qualified majority voting. And as we have just heard, we're very excited with the date of entry into force, with the provisional entry on 1st of May of this year. In terms of the ratification process of Mercosur partners, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay have already completed the ratification process and notified the EU. And then Paraguay ratified the agreement and is expected to notify the EU shortly. And then once the full EU-Mercosur Partnership Agreement enters into force, the interim trade agreement will automatically expire. Now, moving into the general goals of the agreement, I will just briefly comment. In general, the objective of the agreement is to increase bilateral trade and investment by reducing tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade. This is especially relevant for SMEs who often face high administrative burdens with exporting. And it is also important to remember that in the medical technology sectors in Europe, 90% of MedTech companies are actually small and medium-sized enterprises. Then the second objective is to create more predictable rules for trade and investment. This includes disciplines on intellectual property, food safety standards, good regulatory practice, and competition. And then finally, to support shared values, sustainable development, workers' rights, responsible business conduct, and climate action. For MedTech companies, this means that it will provide a more predictable environment and lower trade costs. This slide shows that the agreement is very broad and systemic. I'm not planning to go through all these chapters, but just to show that there are more than 20 chapters covered in the agreement, ranging from trade in goods, rules of origin, customs and trade facilitation, barriers to trade, competition, IP protection, subsidies, state-owned enterprises, transparency, and dispute settlement. And for medical technology suppliers, not every chapter will matter equally, but the breadth of the agreement is important to note, because MedTech access to the market is rarely just about tariffs or conformity assessment recognition alone. Other factors such as customs treatment, product classification, rules of origin, technical standards, regulatory processes, IP protection, access to public procurement, all these elements, even dispute settlement, matter when it comes to market access to various regions. So in that sense, it's a good example of how horizontal provisions that have been agreed in the course of this agreement can still produce sector-specific benefits. So as I mentioned, we do not have a specific MedTech chapter in the agreement, but still we expect to draw certain benefits from the horizontal provisions. And to highlight the ones that we consider particularly valuable, we have national treatment for goods. This means that medical technologies from the EU must receive the same treatment, not less favorable than local products in Mercosur markets. This can mean elimination of any import taxes. I'm not talking about tariffs, but if there were any additional taxes, those would not apply because of the national treatment for goods. Then in terms of tariff reductions, customs duties will be phased out over the quite a long period, 15 years, up to 20, if I understood well. And over time, they will bring meaningful reductions for medical technologies, mostly in Chapter 90, which lists most of the relevant trade codes applicable to medical devices and also including diagnostic instruments. And here, this is a major step forward because tariff levels can range from moderate to quite high in the Mercosur countries. And we know that tariffs matter for determining the landed costs. And even when tariffs are not the only barrier, their removal can improve market access conditions. Then the second area I would like to point out are the rules of origin, which are critical if companies want to claim the preferential tariff treatment. And here we have two main rules of origin highlighted. We have the wholly obtained goods with 10% tolerance for non-originating materials. And then for Chapter 90, we have two options. We have the a rule allowing either to change the tariff heading or a value-added rule of maximum percentage of non-originating material set at 50%. And this is quite technical, but it is also commercially very significant because many medtech suppliers are global and components, software inputs, in general inputs, they can come from different countries. So it's important to have this flexibility. So whether the device qualifies as originating under the agreement can determine whether the tariff preference is actually usable in practice. And having these two options offer flexibility for companies with complex supply chains. Now, to continue with aspects that are relevant for medical technology companies, we also have access to public procurement. Public tenders are very important for the sector because hospitals and public health systems are major purchasers. And the agreement appears to improve market access conditions, although there are specific carve-outs, notably in Argentina and in Brazil's unified health system. So this is an area of opportunity, but not without limitations. But still, having increased transparency around procurement and access can significantly improve opportunities for European suppliers. Then on the regulatory cooperation side, this is very important. The regulatory cooperation, TBT, disciplines, promotion of the use of international standards are very impactful for the sector. And we consider it as another area where benefits can be drawn. We do not have a conformity assessment recognition in this agreement, but still some Mercosur countries already recognize or accept to an extent CE marking, which is the European mark of conformity for compliance with its medical device regulations, although to varying extent. Brazil is the exception. Brazil has a regulatory framework that has a reliance pathway, but it does not include a reliance on CE marking. So we hope that in the future this can be reconsidered given the strong EU regulatory framework ensuring safety and performance of medical devices. And then finally, strengthened IP protection. The agreement provides protection of IP rights, trade secrets, and dispute settlement, which are also very important for investment. So just to conclude very briefly, the agreement represents a significant opportunity for medical technology sector through lowering tariffs, better regulatory predictability, improved procurement access, and finally more stable investment conditions. Some benefits will come immediately with the implementation of the interim trade agreement. Others will have to wait once the full partnership agreement is ratified. But overall, it is a very exciting moment, and we hope we can build on that to strengthen EU-Mercosur relations. Thank you very much. I hope it was useful. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Diana. It was excellent. Thank you for your presentation and for your sharp punctuality. So I'm going to pass the word to our next panelist, but basically first just a quick connection because the EU Mercosur is so important. We thought it would be interesting to have a parallel in relation to the USMCA because we know the medtech sector takes a lot of advantage of this agreement, and these countries are so important to the medtech sector. So with this in mind, we asked Stephen Bipes from AdvaMed to give us an expansion of these discussions with insights on the USMCA and some comparison to the structure we've seen before in the previous presentations in relation to the European agreement, and how does it apply to the medtech sector. So with this in mind, Stephen, thank you so much for being here. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Marina. And can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, very well. Yeah, I can see your screen.
Excellent. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with esteemed colleagues and to talk about this subject. I was been very interested to learn more about the EU-Mercosur deal and the benefits to the medtech sector and patients. And as Marina was saying, you may be wondering, why are we talking about the USMCA, which has nothing to do with Brazil or Mercosur or the EU? But working together as a sector, AdvaMed, the Advanced Medical Technology Association, or the US MedTech Association with many global partners. We're partners with MedTech Europe and Abiis and our colleagues across the Western Hemisphere in the Inter-American Coalition. We work globally as the Global Medical Technology Alliance, GMTA, which Diana is co-chair. And we really appreciate all the different tools that can help minimize the barriers to patient access to medtech. We have many different types of barriers around the world, trade barriers, non-trade barriers, and the trade agreements are very helpful tools to help us minimize every type of unnecessary barrier between patients and the life-saving and life-improving medical technologies of our member companies. So we appreciate the collaboration in the private sector and with the governments, and congratulations, Brazil and Mercosur, on the deal that brings new tools to the industry to help us continue minimizing these barriers. AdvaMed has more than 600 member companies, 2/3 of which are small and medium-sized enterprises, a significant source of medtech innovation. And part of our job is continuing to build capacities on how they can leverage the trade agreement. So very much agree with Daniela's assertion that the trade agreements are not useful unless the industry and the associations and the member companies use them to the benefits of patients. I'm going to be very executive, but just on terminology regarding the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, that's what we call it in the United States. But in Canada, it's referred to as CUSMA, and in Mexico, it's Também. So if you hear those things, that we're all talking about the same agreement, logically each country putting themselves first. Just as a region, the North American region that of US, Canada, Mexico is a $35 trillion market. That's roughly 30% of the global GDP. For MedTech, that region is $240 billion, of which is roughly 40% of the global MedTech market. The USMCA was the update and replacement of the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA of 1992. We helped work and provided inputs to the governments in the conversion, and it was signed in 2019 and put into effect in July 1, 2020. Our objectives at the time in the conversion were to update the then 25-year-old NAFTA agreement with modern trade language, to make meaningful improvements, to maintain the trilateral nature, and most importantly, do no harm in our efforts to minimize barriers to MedTech trade. From a high-level view, there's 34 chapters. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just for the sake of completeness, here they all are. Of them, there's roughly 16 that are of direct relevance to MedTech trade, and I would say of those, there's these 8 that I would characterize as the power chapters that we use quite a bit and most of the time. Of those in the boxes represent around 35% tariff equivalent. So average global tariffs before the current trade situation were around 5%, and those top 3 chapters 2, 4, and 5 help bring that down to 0 for the case of USMCA. The Customs and Trade Facilitation chapter brings costs. So trade facilitation and lack of trade facilitation chapters in general can bring costs roughly equivalent to a 10% import tariff. So having this chapter helps us minimize the tariff equivalent costs related to import licensing, et cetera. Chapters 11, 12, and 28 are specifically on regulatory, different aspects, and those help us, those bring us tools, trade tools, to help minimize the tariff equivalent costs related to regulatory non-alignments that can be 20%. So although tariffs are bad and in the terms of patient barriers, the non-tariff barriers are much larger. And so these tools are particularly helpful in the North American context to help us combat those. Also, government procurement chapter was significant in the USMCA, just noting that with the conversion of the NAFTA to the USMCA, the provision with Canada was withdrawn. So US-Canada government procurement provisions are covered by the WTO Global Government Procurement Agreement, the GPA. US-Mexico is governed principally by this agreement. So MedTech tariffs under the USMCA are 0 under the current situation where there were new tariffs relaid on top, US tariffs on top of Mexico and Canada. Those are zeroed for products that can comply with USMCA rules of origin. Under non-tariff barriers, the USMCA has a Customs and Trade Facilitation chapter that we would characterize as WTO TFA+, TFA being the Trade Facilitation Agreement that helps us, again, minimize the 10% tariff equivalent costs related to customs and import licensing. On regulatory, these tools help us reduce the 20% tariff equivalent costs regarding regulatory non-alignments through 3 different disciplines. The technical barriers to trade, that is WTO TBT+, so it builds upon the World Trade Organization Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement. On the ex post implementation, in other words, under TBT, you kind of need to wait to see the technical regulation published, to see the market distorting effects, to then try and work it backwards. Whereas the third bullet there, Good Regulatory Practices, Chapter 28 under USMCA, helps us deepen the implementation of the WTO TBT agreement ex ante, so that before the publication is published, it needs to go through, let's call it a quality management system for rulemaking that can help weed out the technical regulations that are not in compliance with the WTO TBT agreement. And that helps us save quite a bit of time, but it also is reinforcing of the agreements we have within the 160 some members of the World Trade Organization. And then a novelty of the USMCA agreement is that it has a medical device annex. Chapter 12 includes several sectoral annexes, one of them being dedicated to medical technologies, 12E. And I'm just going to step through these very briefly. On TBT, of these 3 provisions, and I do want to take, just within the effort of building awareness and understanding of how member companies and associations can use these agreements, the TBT agreement at the WTO, it defines terms like technical regulation standards, conformity assessment. It requires that technical regulations cannot be overly trade restrictive. It requires that outdated technical regulations must be removed. Technical regulations must be based upon international standards. The WTO does not define what constitutes an international standard other than the process. And so the USMCA reinforces the WTO definition of that process. On the MedTech Annex, it supports MedTech sector regulatory convergence and requires a reciprocal acceptance of medical device single audit program reports. So as we advance discussions with regulators around the world about not just convergence and reliance, and we talk about reciprocal measures, this is one measure that is fully reciprocal by US FDA, Health Canada, and COFEPRIS across those three regulatory authorities. On good regulatory practices, it embodies, as I mentioned, some of the core elements of the WTO TBT agreement, but also the best practices of OECD and of the Administrative Procedures Act that we use in the United States. It includes elements such as central regulatory coordination, internal consultation, information quality, early planning, dedicated website, use of plain language, transparent regulations, expert advisory groups, regulatory impact assessment, retrospective review, information on regulatory processes, regulatory cooperation, and there is a GRP committee to help implement all of these things. And I can say that as AdvaMed, we've leveraged this chapter to achieve improved regulatory convergence for MedTech across the three jurisdictions. Right now, the USMCA is in its 6-year review that is required by the agreement. Public hearings began last year, and AdvaMed submitted inputs. Really, the parties can decide to walk away from the agreement. Right now, they're in the process of reviewing how is it working, how can it work better. If they don't come to a conclusion, they just keep meeting throughout the duration of the agreement. We are hopeful and advocating that the trilateral agreement be renewed and that the governments use the existing mechanisms within it to help improve it even further and deepen implementation. As I mentioned, AdvaMed submitted a written submission back in December. We provided oral testimony and we're members of a broader-based industry coalition supporting the renewal of the agreement. And we really just want to see it renewed. We don't want to open up the text, and we let's shore it up with the existing mechanisms as we can. I provide here as links to you all, and we will share this deck with everyone, the link to the full USMCA text, to the Coalition for North American Trade, CNAT, for AdvaMed, for the Brazilian Medical Health Industry Alliance, for which I'm grateful to have this trade webinar today. We are all members of the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence, of which Marina serves as in the technical secretariat. And also, we're all members of the Global Medical Technology Alliance, working towards the common goal of minimizing barriers and unnecessary barriers to patient access to MedTech. And we're in this effort to help leverage the trade agreements, EU, Mercosur, and USMCA to help achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very, very comprehensive. I'm going to take advantage of these 3 minutes that we have to complement a view on the Mercosur EU agreement, and then I promise I'm going to open the floor for questions. But I think it would be interesting to see this work that Abiis is developing with support of the coalition, and that we made the effort to try to understand the codes, the tariff codes, and the schedules from the Europe and Brazil in relation to market access. So this is a nutshell of what we have. So on the Brazilian side, we have 25% of MedTech products at duty-free entry at May 1st this year. 41% of the tariff lines applicable to MedTech will be free of access in 10 years and 11% in 15 years. So the expectation is that in 16 years, we have full liberalization of the MedTech products entering to Brazil. 20 tariff lines are excluded, and I have to say we have 223 tariff lines. That was Abiis mapped as the MedTech sector in Brazil. And the average tariff rate in the first year of entry into force of the agreement, so May 1st would be 7.03% import duty, and going below that in 16 years, reaching zero. So this is Brazil in a nutshell, and we did the same exercise for Europe. And in Europe, we have 87% of MedTech products already duty-free entry. So that reinforces Daniela's presentation in relation to the market access from Brazil to Europe. The remaining tariff lines will be phased out in 5 years, and there's only one product, one tariff line that is going to be reduced in 9 years. If I'm not wrong, is apparel, which is a very sensitive product sector here in Brazil. And the tariff duty for Europe, May 1st, average is 0.71%, meaning that's basically zero for exporting from Brazil to EU. That's very huge. That's very important. We have to learn how to use the agreement as the secretary said. I think there are some challenges coming ahead. We can discuss this a little bit, but this is a very, very nice and important milestone for the relationship between Europe and Mercosur. And then finally, on the TBT, I just wanted to reinforce the talk of Steven and also Daniela, when it brings like the chapters are beyond the WTO, reinforces the WTO, but go beyond that. And I think it's very important because here, in the case of the TBT chapter in Europe, we have reasonable periods being defined. So technical regulation should have a vacant period of 6 months before entering into force, and this is defined in the agreement, so it's more specific than the WTO. There is specific provisions for regulatory impact assessment and application of GRPs in a more concrete way, not only for technical regulations, but also for conformity assessment procedures. This is also a novelty in relation to the TBT. There is clarity in relation to international standards that are not established in the TBT. So there is a reference explicitly to the ISO, the IEC, and so on. So this is new, and this is something we have to be careful and control while we are going through the TBT chapter in the EU agreement. And it's important also I think there's another, on conformity assessment, there is the novelty of suppliers declaration that Brazil does not have, but the agreement brings this provision, so it's something that we will have to see. And a preference for accreditations via ILAC, ELAC, EAF, and IECC CB scheme, which is also a very, very good direction towards harmonization of accreditation standards. It's important to also the TBT chapter brings a minimum 6-day period for comments. This is a provision that is defined in the agreement that also goes beyond TBT. So they are WTO plus. So there are several provisions also on marking that we should be careful and take into consideration because they are more concrete than what we already have. And companies from both sides will have to pay attention into that. So this is a very brief overview that is a bit more specific in relation to the MedTech sector. Abiis is going to provide this in a more detailed way to all of you as well. But with this in mind, I'm going to close my presentation and open the floor for questions. We have 2 questions already in the chat. Bruno, would you like to ask them, or can I just read them out? How do you prefer? I see you have your camera open.
I can ask live. So thank you, Daniela, for your presentation, and Diana and Stephen, very comprehensive. I just have these 2 questions regarding, first of all, if the EU Mercosur agreement has any specific provisions regarding regulatory convergence. We saw that we have some provisions regarding good regulatory practices, which is a very great news. But is there any other provision regarding this? And the second one is regarding the public procurement between governments, and we saw that SUS purchases are out of the scope of the agreement. And I'd like just to confirm if for the Brazilian companies that manufactures, not only Brazilian companies, but any company that has manufacturing facility here in Brazil can access the EU public purchases, or considering the reciprocity, this is not in the scope of the agreement. Thank you.
Marina, should I answer and then we get the next questions?
Yeah, if that's okay for you, then I have follow-up for Stephen and Diana as well, unless you prefer me to take other questions.
No, okay, it's okay. So let me first thank Diana, Stephen, and Marina for the presentations. They were really helpful. It's really good to see the sector making this analysis. So for us, it's really good to see. So Bruno, going directly to the first question on regulatory convergence, it's not so explicit, but we do have an article on trade facilitating initiatives. And this is something that we usually incorporate in our TPT agreements and chapters. And in Portuguese, it's Iniciativas Facilitadoras de Comércio. And the idea is to provide for cooperation and discussions. So the chapter provides for this possibility of having discussions on sector-specific discussions. So for me, if both Brazilian MedTech sector and the EU MedTech sector make this movement, it will be easier for us or for the EU to propose this discussion under the TPT committee. And so we would be able to advance, for instance, in a reliance discussions or something like that. So it's not direct, but it provides a space for it. So. And on government procurement, yes and no. So since we have this exception for the Brazilian Unified Health System, the EU added a reciprocity clause in their offer. And for now, we are not sure how they will apply, because although we have this exception, as of today, the Brazilian Unified Health System purchases products from abroad. The SUS does not only buy Brazilian products. We have the exception, so we can conduct public policy, so we have like a policy space, but we buy foreign products, including from the EU. So we're not sure how the EU will apply this reciprocity clause, and this is something really interesting that maybe if the sector, when the agreement is into force, if the sector tries to conduct public procurement and etc., you can get back to us. But I think it's something that we will discover as the agreement will be implemented.
Excellent, thank you.
Diana, would you like to comment from your side anything on those issues?
No, thank you. I think it's Daniela covered it very well. Thank you.
Okay, so I was going to ask you exactly about these sectorial initiatives that are covered within the TPT chapter of the agreement, Daniela, and I don't know if Diana has this information in relation to Europe, but maybe my question for you would be, for both of you, would be, to whom should we talk to? Should we go to CSEX, for example, or in Brazil? Or should we go, there is a point of contact specific for the agreement, I understand maybe, or should we go first, for example, to Anvisa and align with them prior, what's your suggestion in your, I know everything is very new, and I know we are changing the way with the car driving. So I understand, but it would be interesting if we have some policy channels to explore. And I don't know if in Europe this is already settled, but that would be also interesting for us to figure it out. And then just in interest of time, Stephen, it would be interesting in having your thoughts, for example, if we have like a sectoral initiative in this agreement, taking the experience of the one you had at USMCA, what would be lessons learned or major critical issues that we should be taking into consideration or thinking about if we are going to advance with this initiative?
I would,
And then
in our
I think,
experience, I'm sorry,
no,
go ahead.
I was going to say if Daniela can answer, and then
Okay,
I don't know, and then
perfect.
Diana, and then you wrap up.
Pronto.
Okay, so as you mentioned, Marina, we are learning to implement agreements. It has been a long time that we have not negotiated an important agreement as this one, but I would suggest that you send to Sussex. So we will be implementing all the chapters of the agreement. I would say it's also important to communicate on Visa and let them know, because they are the ones that hold the competence for any reliance or any mechanism that we would be able to negotiate. So it's something that we would be doing together.
And if I may add from my perspective, I think experience shows that it always helps if industries in different regions align on what are the asks. At least whenever talking to the European Commission, they always welcome whenever we are able to say that industry on both sides actually has the same questions, the same asks. So to that end, we can consider a follow-up action, identifying questions or follow-up requests. So perhaps that's something that we could do jointly with Abiis. And we are engaging actively with European Commission, who actually has a lot of competence when it comes to negotiation of trade agreements. So we have good counterparts here in Brussels to be able to pass the message. And separately, we also engage with our sector department in the European Commission, which may not be directly engaged in the negotiations of the trade agreement, but is exchanging with Anvisa in the context of regulatory cooperation. So trying to connect all the dots and come with unified messaging. I think this will provide a strong signal to policymakers that this is what industry would like to see, and if it's something that is feasible. I would certainly welcome the opportunity to deepen the possibility in the context of regulatory cooperation, and also happy to take back any questions related to procurement access for Brazilian suppliers. Yes, that would be my perspective. Thank you.
Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, I would say going back to those numbers, 5, 10, 20, average global tariffs for all product categories, including MedTech, 5%. The average tariff equivalent cost of customs processes is 10%, and the average tariff equivalent cost of regulatory non-alignments is 20%. These agreements, EU, Mercosur, USMCA, and others, help us reinforce the existing mechanisms we have at the WTO. We have successfully used the WTO process to achieve greater MedTech alignment, but it takes longer. I'd say tools like the EU-Mercosur deal or USMCA and other bilateral agreements are a little bit more user-friendly. The time frame is a little bit faster, but all going back to the core we have at the WTO. In our experience, 90 to 95% of the unnecessary barriers to trade that we see as a sector in the world would not exist if the health authorities, the respective health authorities, complied with the trade obligations. That's why we've put such a strong emphasis on building capacities with the health authorities, with the trade authorities, with the private sector to use tools like the WTO e-ping system, and to help prevent these things from happening, to combat, I would say, the mistaken understanding by some health authorities that trade is not their role. As we discussed at the WTO Public Forum back in, I think it was 2023, health authorities do have a responsibility on trade. And it's, no one but those holding the pen on drafting regulations can ensure compliance with the WTO TBT agreement, that they're not inadvertently creating unnecessary barriers to trade and medtech trade. And I would say that reinforced with the fact that probably not Brazil, EU, and North America, but in many jurisdictions in the world, the sector tends to be inappropriately regulated as pharmaceuticals that also introduces inadvertent barriers to health and trade. So I think these two agreements and can be used in the methods that you've discussed. Existing text, but the mechanisms and, say, the GRP committees and the trade facilitating groups within them can help further advance the suggestions of the global medtech sector in this effort.
Thank you, Stephen. I have another comment. You mentioned, Daniela, in your speech that you are drafting documents to facilitate access for the private sector in relation to the agreement. This is going to be available in that QR code that you've just mentioned. Are you going to transpose the codes that were negotiated from 2012 in case of Brazil and Mercosur tariff code and common nomenclature from Europe 2013 to the new codes? How are you going, or are you planning to deal with this? This is a huge challenge for the private sector to transpose the products that were negotiated and the tariffs applied therein with the new codes and the new descriptions sometimes that we have. So I understand that this might bring other kind of negotiation issues, but at the same time, for those that are pretty straightforward in relation to coding, description, and new codes, how are you planning, or are you planning to deal with this at CESEX? Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a super specific question, but so all of the information will be available in this website that I just shared in the chat. So we will be releasing information manuals. So if you go to this web page, all of the stuff that we will publish will be there. For now, what we expect to publish today or the day or tomorrow is the table with the nomenclature and the codes that were negotiated in the agreement. So it's 2012 for Mercosur, and I forgot the date for the EU. We are, as of now, discussing within Mercosur, and the European Commission is also doing their work to do the transposition of the codes. So they will be, they will be as of today, which is the NCM code that applies for today's trade. It's important to highlight that this usually takes time. We did this when we were negotiating with EFTA countries. So we updated the codes, and we took a month to do this. So we expect, and we will conclude the job by May 1st. And then we are studying on how to publish this and how to make this available for the private sector. It's important to highlight as well that when the Portal Único is fully implemented, it will be much easier to access this information. It will be already at the DWIMP when you register an import
declaration.
Exactly. So all of it will be automatically there, but until we reach the fully implementation of Portal Único, we will see how we can publish this transposition. We know it's important for the private sector.
And the reason I'm asking that is because we are also available to support you, for example, in reaching out the codes in terms of specific products. But I understand, because I understand we have some specificities in the Mercosur nomenclature that we don't have in Europe. So we are there, and I think every sector should be available to support you in terms of doing this. So count on us for that. I don't know if there are any other questions to our panelists today. The floor is available. We have 1 minute before finishing our webinar. If we don't, there is one hand. I see one hand. Wait. Sumiu. Yeah, it's not there anymore. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Daniela Matos from CSEX Brazil, Diana Caneca, and Stephen Bipes. Bruno, you are the chairman of the Abiis. Would you like to do a closing 1 minute remark? Greetings to all.
No, just thank you, Marina, for the moderation. Thank you all of our panelists, and special for Daniela from the Brazilian government. Your cooperation has been very valuable for us in the MedTech sector. We are very interested and excited with this agreement entering into force from May 1st on, and count on us to continue moving forward with our good regulatory practices, facilitating trade agenda, that this is very important, not for us from the industry, but for our patients. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.